Shalom, shalom. Welcome. I'm Rabbi Scott with Beth Yeshua, Messianic Synagogue in Fort Myers, Florida. This is our Torah study midweek. We do these from home. You're welcome to join us. We publish them usually Wednesday night, sometimes Thursday morning, sometimes Thursday afternoon, sometimes Friday afternoon, depending on how the week goes. But this week, of course, we're getting this out to you today. Just a couple of business matters, some matters to discuss a little bit. Let me try to make a little tweak here if I can real quick. A couple things to discuss today is one of the things that we have is that our services in the synagogue, we are coming up on Shabbat Shuvah. If you're watching this video sometime in the future, then this is Shabbat Shuvah, of course, is this Shabbat, September 26th, and that is going to be our Shabbat services. We also will do Tashlich after Shabbat Shuvah services, and we'll do Tashlich this year in our community at the synagogue there. We have a lovely body of water out back, and we will go ahead and do that here this week. But I also want to bring to your attention the balance of our services, and I will try to bring this up for you on screen. This, of course, is posted on our website and should be available for you to see on your screen. You can find this, of course, on Facebook and on our website. But as you can see, we have here the community Tashlich service, of course, this Shabbat Shuvah. And then we have Erev Yom Kippur, our Kol Nidre service, 7 p.m. on Sunday evening, September 27th. Following that, the following day, we have Yom Kippur and the four services that you show there on your screen. And then we have some teachings and discussion time during the afternoon between the services. And then, of course, we have Sukkot. The first day is going to be October 3rd at 11 a.m., and then Shemini Atzeret, which is available on your screen, is going to be the following Shabbat, October 10th, and then Simchat Torah. And Simchat Torah this year is going to be a healing service. We're going to pray for healing. We're going to gather in small groups around the Torah. The Torah is the word of Adonai. Of course, Yeshua was the Word made flesh, and he was Adonai in the form of a man, come down to earth, and as such, those who gravitate towards him, who stretch out to grasp him, we have the example of healing in the Gospels. And many people are, well, let's just say it's been a difficult year medically and health-wise for many of us. So if you would like to pray for healing, if you would like to come forward in faith, and that seems like something you would like to do, then I do encourage you to come out for our Simchat Torah service. We will do everything we normally do at Simchat Torah. We will roll the scroll back and have a chance for the children to come up and read, and everybody to come up and see the scroll. But the other thing that we will do this year is we will do the healing time around, pray for healing around the Torah scroll, asking, of course, Yeshua, our healer, Adonai, our healer, to heal us. So looking forward to that. Just wanted that on your radar. You can join us with that if you're in the area. Okay, I will take this back and deal with that there. And let's see. Let's go ahead and turn this over here and minimize that. So, okay. So yes, indeed, we're in the middle of the High Holy Days, and I just wanted to maybe share some memories and some reflections this week. We're coming down to the end of the Torah cycle, coming down to the end of the year. And of course, this is a time to be somewhat reflective on the year that has passed and to think about these things. But another facet of my life, my experience personally, as many of you know, I grew up in southwestern Oregon. And having grown up in the West, it's a different experience out there. There's a different culture out there than, of course, here in Southwest Florida and other parts of our nation. But I grew up, as I've told you folks, in the woods and the hills and the streams and the mountains, and had a very rugged and outdoors kind of life when I was a child. And this week, last week more so, and into this week, there were forest fires raging throughout California and Oregon and places like this. And the house that I lived in for a good part of my childhood was in an idyllic little valley on the edge of what would be government land at that time, and so my playground as a boy was basically government land, uninhabited, unpopulated, undeveloped natural wilderness for miles and miles and miles to the south, and so I could go out my front door and walk south and west and north, and southwest and east, and walk for hours or days even without seeing any sign of development. So this is how I grew up, and it makes for great stories to tell my children and this kind of thing. We lived in this little idyllic valley. You would go up a lonely sort of hill mountain road, and it would go up between the sagebrush and the pines, and then when you hit the ridge line, you would drop down into this hidden valley, and there was a creek bottom there, and you'd go down into the meander around the creek bottoms, and then you'd hop up onto the valley floor, and there was this little house on the valley floor, kind of on the back side of nowhere, really. Just a truly idyllic and unusual existence that we had there. But the report that I got this week was that the forest fire was less than 1,000 feet from my boyhood home, and that was the report that I had about a week and a half ago. I have yet to hear from anyone that the house survived or did not survive. I know some people that I knew that lived up the ridge line from us, and on the other side of the ridge line, on the other side, their house was spared, and the flames were once again within about 1,000 feet of their house as well. So not sure what happened here, but it did kind of put me in a frame of contemplation and memory, and thinking about the life that we had, and just being reminded of that. And I did want to kind of to share some things about some of my memories around the High Holy Days. As you know, or perhaps most of you know, I had a very secular and worldly, non-spiritual, non-religious childhood, and so I didn't become part of the community, the body of Messiah, until I was in my 20s, and it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I connected with Messianic fellowship and was able to begin to explore and celebrate and practice in that fashion. So this time of year, of course, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, and so forth, it took me, I'll be honest with you, it took me a while to get my head around Yom Kippur, because for me, the essence of atonement, the expression of atonement and coming into the atonement of Adonai, that was my first sort of foundational approach to Adonai. That was how I came to him in the first place, was because I needed atonement. I just understood that before I understood a lot of other things about Adonai. And so that restoration and reconciliation was kind of part and parcel of everything that I did, and it was part of my daily relationship with God. Not that I needed to be atoned for day by day, but just the observation, the connection, the celebration of that atonement, the knowledge of that atonement being a present thing. I explained it one way to one person. I said that it would be like being married for many years, and then somebody comes along and tells you, so what are you doing for your anniversary? And you're like, what do you mean anniversary? What is an anniversary? Well, anniversary is the day that you got married, and you celebrate that. That's what you do, right? Well, for me, every day was a celebration. So that was a little bit of a dilemma that I had in approaching Yom Kippur in the beginning of my life. atonement was my foundation. So the observation of atonement was kind of something I had done on a daily basis. Not saying that this is good. This was just my psyche. It was where I was coming from. In the Messianic communities that I was involved in my 20s, we would frequently go out in the woods after Yom Kippur, which of course is in the fall of the year, and where we lived, the temperatures would have dropped typically this time of year, or at least into October they would, and we'd go out and after Yom Kippur, we would go out in the woods and we would cut down a dozen or so second and third year saplings and drag them back, and we'd begin to fashion a frame, of course, to build our sukkah. Every year we built a sukkah out of fresh cut saplings, and then we would cut low evergreen boughs, the ones that draped low to the ground, and we would cut those back off of many of the big evergreens, cedars and firs and so forth, and we would begin to hang these over the top of the sides of the sukkah. I read somewhere one time that evergreens are not supposed to be used in the sukkah. I don't know why. We used them, and they were nice and plentiful, and they offered a sweet smell. But I think maybe one of the issues was you're supposed to be able to see the stars through the roof of your sukkah. That could be. I don't know. But if you put enough palm fronds on your sukkah, you're not going to see the roof either. A lot of people will put bamboo, like a bamboo woven sort of mat on their sukkah. I understand that. We came to Sukkot from almost a perspective of just delighting in the text, delighting in the Word of God, and so we didn't have, at least in the community I was involved in, we didn't have the trappings of modern interpretation, such that nowadays, especially here in Southwest Florida, you can buy the sukkah tent, which is the prefabricated tent structure that people use for a sukkah down here, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly appropriate. It was just radically different than my experience growing up, or at least when I was in my 20s. So we would finish this sukkah, and the ladies of the community would be ready, and they would come out, and the fellows would take a couple tables, maybe three tables, and chairs, as many as we could fit, and then the ladies would take over, and they would begin to decorate and adorn the sukkah, and the fall foliage and turned leaves and things like this, just anything to give it a festive appearance. And we would set this up either in the yard of somebody's house, or we'd set it up on somebody's deck, and then it would be about the food. Nothing is complete without the food. It's a very Jewish sentiment. Basically the essence of every Jewish holiday, I say, is that they tried to kill us, Adonai saved us. Let's eat. Let's have a party and a meal. When I was young, when I was a child, there was a series of books that were written by Rose Wilder, I think was her name, and she was the daughter of Laura Ingalls, which is known in popular culture in the United States. And Laura Ingalls had written a book of her childhood, her life as a pioneer on the prairie, and so forth and so on. Her book was made into a television series starring Michael Landon back in the 70s or 80s or something like that. In any case, so Little House on the Prairie. Okay, so that's the story. Yeah, that's the book. And the series had one book that was called Farmer Boy, and of course we had read these when I was a child. In fact, I mentioned my idyllic existence as a child when I was growing up. We didn't have power in many cases, and so our leisure time, our recreational time in the evening, consisted almost exclusively of reading, and then we got a music player, a record player at some point, and would listen to records sometimes. But my early days, in my early childhood, was exclusively reading in the evenings, and we read books and books and books and books, and so we had read this series, of course, the Laura Ingalls Little House on the Prairie series. And book 2 of this series was a book called Farmer Boy, and it was notable and memorable for this, that it just described these huge gourmet meals that the young boy would eat. These just incredible meals. I remember this. Multiple courses and different things. Yeah, that is what we remember, isn't it? We remember the meals. We remember the Thanksgiving meals. We remember the festive occasions. And I remember at Sukkot, the meals. I remember sitting in the sukkah with everyone and being and just enjoying the fellowship and enjoying the community and enjoying the food. Just powerful memories for me. I don't even know how to describe it here. But it was just a real blessing and a real part of my formative life. Things are different in Southwest Florida. I know some people do the camping thing for the Feast of Tabernacles or for Sukkot. I understand that. What we would do is we'd get in our sukkah and we'd have these meals, and then we'd drink and talk until late in the evening or into the early morning. We would just discuss everything and anything spiritually and practically. And then late in the evening, some of the men would just lay down on mats on the floor of the sukkah and would just go to sleep in the sukkah. And others of us would lay down in mats on the ground. Some people would come with campers or RVs and this kind of thing. And this was our community that I had when I was in my early Messianic experience. The next morning, you would brace the very chilly temperatures, and you would come out, and I remember the very, very cool mornings with coffee in the sukkah and a whole grain toast product of some kind with avocado or maybe another fruit, and another thing we had was a kind of spiced venison, which would make a kind of sausage, and we'd have this with avocado and eggs, and of course no pork. But these are my memories of Sukkot, like Farmer Boy. There's the Sukkah boy for you, enjoying that. The biggest memories of my 20s in the Messianic movement were around these holidays: Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, Hanukkah, Purim, of course. These were the big events with music, with dancing, and the food and the gatherings. And when I moved to Southwest Florida is when I really began to unpack the mysteries of the Moed, the mysteries of the appointed times, to be able to really understand beyond that of just a fellowship, beyond that of just a gathering, what was really being bound up, what was really happening with these things in this list in Leviticus 23 when Adonai says, these are my appointed times. What was the purpose of all these things? This year, the Yom Teruah, the day, the Yom Zichron, the day of the reminder of the trumpet blast. This year, the significance to me has been largely in connection with the return of Yeshua. The idea that the return of Yeshua is heralded by both the monthly shofar blast in the Rosh Chodesh observation of the new moon and the annual shofar blasts of Yom Teruah, that's Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, when we blast the shofar on both of those days specifically. In our community, the men like to blow the shofar. They like to make a noise, so we blow it every Shabbat. If some is good, then more is better, right? But the significance this year has just been a reminder of the impending return of Yeshua. Just in this week's Torah portion, we have, speaking of Devarim 32, the rock, blameless is his work, it says in chapter 32, verse 4. We have these repetitions of the rock, the rock, the rock throughout chapter 32. If you go down to verse 15 of chapter 32, Yeshurun, which means upright. The upright grew fat and wicked. The upright, or the righteous, grew fat and wicked. You got fat, you grew thick, you gorged. You forsook the God who made him, and he mocked the rock of his salvation. There's a little bit of a play on words, Yeshurun being the righteous one, and the phonetic connection to Yeshua, the rock of his salvation. It says in verse 18, the rock who birthed you, who you ignored, you forgot the one who brought you forth. It says that in 31, their rock, speaking of the rock of the peoples, is not like our rock. Verse 37, where are their gods, the rocks that they took refuge in? But what is our rock? Our rock is the rock of salvation. Our rock is the rock of Yeshua. And this is the one whom we follow and the one whom we serve. And again, this Yom Zikaron Teruah, this Yom Teruah blast, this Yom Kippur blast, the Rosh Chodesh blast, all this is a memory of the early shofar blasts, of course, but it's a prophetic indication that we are looking ahead to the return of Yeshua. In this year, for all the modern crises and for all the modern tension and all the modern struggle that we have, COVID, racial tensions, government dysfunctions, we have the obvious preparations and stagings of power brokers around the world. We have all these current crises as expressions of the struggle of this age, and I get that, but at the same time, it's the expressions of birth pangs that herald the return of Yeshua. This is the great joyful event for those who are in Messiah, and it is the great doom for those who aren't. Do you see that? There's a polarization in the world right now, those who agree and those who do not agree over whatever issue it is. And whatever the issue is, we're very polarized in our modern culture. There's very little gray area. You're either for or against something or someone. And some people chafe at that and say, well, we need to all just get along, respect each other's differences, and so on and so forth. And I understand that, but allow me to say this, that the trajectory of the span of human history is coming down to a laser-like point of focus. And it is that at that point of focus is a decision which must be made. And that decision is Yeshua, yes or no. And that's what we have. We have this sort of preparation in our culture, almost like a reflection, almost like a prophetic indicator that Yeshua is coming. And when Yeshua comes, it's going to be sheep and goats. It's going to be light and dark. It's going to be black and white, if you will. Yeshua's coming is the great joyful event for those of us in Messiah. It just is. There's nothing else to compare to it. The return of our bridegroom. I've spoken previously of the children worshiping in the streets and in the temple courts when Yeshua came in on his donkey. I mean, the spontaneous worship, and Yeshua says, out of the mouths of these children, Adonai has perfected praise. Meanwhile, the stodgy and corrupt officials of the temple said, hush, hush, keep them quiet. Yeshua says, no, we can't keep them quiet. This is praise. This is worship. The return of Yeshua is going to be so much more than that. All the children of faith, all the children of Adonai, the people of Adonai, the children of faith in Yeshua are all going to spontaneously erupt with praise and joy in rejoicing at his return. But contrastingly and correspondingly, there won't be any sidelines. There won't be anybody on the sidelines saying, that's kind of curious. Look at them. Yeshua's coming back and they're excited. Oh, that's very good for them. No, the return of Yeshua will be certain and inescapable doom for those who are not in Messiah. It just absolutely will be. Remember when it says the people cry out, may the rocks fall on us. That's the doom. That's the despair level. When we hear that trumpet shout, when we hear that shofar blast, and we know Yeshua is somewhere in the skies coming, and we know that we're going to meet him in Jerusalem. Either he's going to sweep us up and meet us there, or sweep us up and meet him in the sky, but we're on our way to Jerusalem. We haven't figured out the logistics yet, but that's where we're going. And all those who are on the sidelines are going to have the great doom, the great turmoil and despair. Do you remember when the door was closed in the ark? Noah's Ark, the Ark of Noah, when the door was closed, nobody could get in. And then the rains began to fall. You don't think people were pounding on the door in despair and fear. Absolutely in panic. They were beside themselves with panic. They were probably trying to claw through the wood using their fingernails. But the door was shut. It was closed. This is the level of doom and despair for those who are not in Yeshua. The animosity and hatred from the world, the enemies of Adonai and the destroyer, these are all likewise reaching fevered, elevated pitch. Not only do we have polarization in our culture over things like politics, but those who hate Adonai, even this level of hatred that we have today is minor compared to the level of violence that is coming. It's like having a neighbor who hates you. You have a neighbor, some of us have had this. We have a neighbor and they just really don't like us. And they generally make our lives pretty miserable. But at the end of the day, they're probably mostly just harmless. It's just an awful lot of tension and strife and maybe no real physical injury. But you know they don't like you. And then one day you find out that he's running for sheriff. And you realize the polls are out and he's going to win. And now his hateful glares that he throws at you, when you see him in the morning, when he sees you, and the glares and stares that he throws at you, those hateful glances have been replaced by an evil, gleeful grin as he ponders how he is going to finally exercise his hatred and violence against you. Remember when Esau comforted himself with thoughts of killing his brother? Meaning it was something he brooded on and meditated on. Have you noticed how meditation and medication rhyme? Esau was medicating himself, if you will, with thoughts and plans and imaginations, with fantasies of killing his brother. If you're familiar with addiction treatment and addiction psychology, there is the addiction moment, the self-destructive expression, the actual addictive behavior. Some people call it acting out or something like this. This is the real destructive, noticeable effect on the psyche and the temperament of the self-harming victim. The person who's an addict is self-harming. But all addictions are about managing or avoiding pain. And sometimes with drug addictions, it's about avoiding the pain of denial of the greatest induced high, that the person has experienced a drug-induced or chemical-induced high, and they just really want that back. And the pain is the denial of having that high. This ecstasy that is provided by the brain's reaction to the poisons and the chemicals, this ecstasy is so powerful that the addict will do anything to recapture that moment. And to be denied that moment is to live with pain, emotional, psychological pain. This is the destructive moment of addictive behavior, whether it be drug or alcohol or various sexual addictions, this kind of thing. And we understand that. That's kind of the ultimate moment of addiction, the actual expression. But there's another moment of addictive expression that some believe is actually more destructive and more effective at enslaving the victim long term. And that is the planning, the deliberating, the fantasy, the imagining, the preparation, the quest for the moment, if you will. This is where the brain gets into a hyper-aroused state. It's not the full arousal that you think of in terms of a sexual moment, but it's an arousal. It's like a pre-arousal state with adrenaline and serotonin and other brain chemicals. And it's an elevated state, and the person becomes consumed with their quest, with their search, this ambition for the actual moment of addiction expression. Why am I talking about all this? Because this was Esau comforting himself with thoughts of killing his brother Jacob. It consumed him. It became more, actually, than the actual event of the act of violence itself. It was more destructive to him. It became more consuming to him. And it was out of that hatred and that hyper-aroused sort of violent state, almost a romantic state, where you're romantically thinking about, I'm sorry, that may be a difficult way to think of it for some people, but it's, when you think of something romantically, you stylize it, you exaggerate it, you elevate it, you have a tendency to think of it more than it actually is. When a young man falls in love with a woman, she walks on water, and she walks in beauty like the night of cloudless stars and starry skies. She's the most beautiful thing in all creation. The truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter if she is or she isn't. He thinks she is, and he becomes romantically thinking about this. So that's what I mean by a romantic state. That Esau had elevated and escalated thoughts of killing his brother to the point of it becoming this consuming sort of stylized ethos in his world. It was his shtick, his sort of personal temperament and his aesthetic, if you will. It was out of this hatred and out of this pending doom, pending violence, that Amalek was born. Amalek was descendant of a grandson of Esau. And this is why we see Amalek attacking Israel out of nowhere when they had just left Egypt. This is why the battle raged all day long. This is why the battle went back and forth according to Moses' raised hands, his arms. This is why we are counseled to remember Amalek and defeat him in every generation. Amalek, or the spirit of Amalek, is the spirit of the enemy, the Satan. For thousands of years, the enemy has comforted himself with thoughts of killing God and killing the people of God. That is what I believe. I believe that when the enemy is given free rein, when the enemy is given open permission, the hatred and violence, first for the people of God, and then for all people who are made in the image of God, will reach such a state, such a level of evil and malice, such as the world has never known. All this is to say, kind of in a long-winded way, that days are coming that are dark and heavy and frightening. Days are coming that are inescapable. Remember when the text says you'll run to the mountains and beg the mountains to fall on us, to avoid first the enemy and then to avoid the judgment of Adonai. I explained to you the forest fires that ravaged the West this week, that came within 1,000 feet of my childhood home, in this little valley, in this little ravine, this sort of idyllic spot. You wouldn't know where it was. You had to know where it was to find it. You go up this ridge line, this lonely ridge line, and come across a saddle between two mountains, and you drop down into a little creek bottoms. You meander your way through the creek bottoms and up onto the valley floor, and there's this little 15-acre valley in the middle of nowhere, a little wilderness paradise where I spent my childhood. Idyllic and beautiful. But the fires last week in Oregon had penetrated that valley. And I can just imagine the rage and fury. I can just imagine. I wasn't there, but I can imagine. And I have seen fires. I've been within less than 100 feet of a raging forest fire. And it's the heat, the smoke, the sound, the wind is the most frightening thing, one of the most frightening things I've ever experienced. The heat, the flames, the evil orange-red glow, it's fear in visual form. This is what is coming for the people of earth. At some point, we will all look at this in the face. First in the form of the animus of the enemy, and then in the form of the judgment of Adonai. Remember when Jerusalem is described as a stumbling block for all nations? Meaning they stumbled over it, they are obsessed with it, they hate it, they want to consume it and destroy it all at once. Well, let me say this, that I believe that humanity is the stumbling block of the enemy, of the Satan. I'll say that again, humanity is the stumbling block of the Satan. 1 Peter chapter 1 describes the angels looking into salvation that has been provided for humanity with fascination, with curiosity. I believe that the enemy is also fascinated with humanity, but not in a good way. Humanity, human beings, people, are created in the image of God. And that would be so offensive and anathematic. I don't think we can minimize the brooding, the imaginations, the terror that the enemy has in store. First for the people of God, those in the kingdom of Messiah, but second for all peoples. And this is the net effect. If the enemy is going to spend eternity in fires of judgment, then the enemy wants to take as many people with him as possible. And it would be a thing to have much of humanity judged with the same fire as Adonai has reserved for the Satan. These are my beliefs, and they may or may not be shared by very many people. We don't know how all this hangs together. We don't know how it all works together. We don't really need to know. I just know that you need Yeshua, and you need him as an atoning Mashiach. When Yeshua came on the scenes, Yochanan the Immerser, a miraculous child born of his parents' old age, and yet one who was dedicated from the moment he was conceived to be a forerunner, a prophet of Adonai, an Eliyahu, if you know what that means, the Elijah of his time. And there's Elijahs of each time. Each epoch has its Elijah. And Yochanan, John the Baptist, was this. The declaration of Yeshua, when Yeshua appeared on the scene, when he came to the immerser to be immersed, the declaration was, behold, look, see, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. In Yochanan, John chapter 3, we have the most famous verse in Western civilization and Christianity, for God so loved the world. But look at the rest of it. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. Whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. Most of us know that one. But reading on, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. So what we have is we have a polarization. We have an A-B. We have a positive, negative. We have black and white. Do you hear what's being set up here? God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. So we're dealing with condemnation or salvation. Whoever believes in him, that is whoever, the people of the world, whoever believes in him, that is Yeshua, is not condemned, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is condemned already, because he did not believe. This is the judgment. The light came into the world. The people loved darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. Everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light. But whoever does what is true comes to the light. Do you see this? Whoever believes is not condemned. Whoever does not believe is condemned already. Do you see the polarization? It's either or. It's blessing or curse. It's life or death. There is no middle ground here. It's mercy or judgment. Light has come, but the people love darkness rather than light. Everyone who does wicked things versus everyone who does what is true. There's no gray area here. There are only clear distinctions. You either are or you aren't. Let me take this moment just to mention this. Our understanding of the Scriptures, that you must come to the Father in Yeshua. No one comes to the Father except by me, said Yeshua. Your worship, your adoration, the honor of Adonai is appropriate. But the Mashiach has come and is coming again and has left us his Ruach, his Spirit. Come to the Son, that you may know the Father. What you know of Adonai, what you know of the Father has been revealed to you. Yes, you know the Father. If you are Jewish, you know of Adonai. You know him. Imagine if you were introduced to your betrothed. Imagine if you were introduced to the one who was set aside for you, the one you're betrothed to. She is beautiful. She is the most beautiful thing on the planet. Or if you're a woman and you've been betrothed and you're introduced to your husband, he is ruddy and he is handsome, but all you can do is watch him or her through glass, as if they're on display. You just watch them. Or imagine if you were really the one in the cage, like the animals at the zoo, as you watch this woman of beauty, or this man, the one you're betrothed to. Do you really want to live this way? Do you want to study your betrothed through glass? Do you want to look on them? You're in the cage, and you don't get to be with them? Is that good enough for you? Then abandon your cage, abandon your prison, this prison cell of your unbelief, and come to Yeshua, the Lamb of God, the Son of Elohim, and there find your heart's first and greatest eternal love. Come so you can know him for eternity. Come so you can be saved from death. Come so you can be delivered from your sin. Come so you can be forgiven. Come so you can have hope in this darkest hour. Come so you don't have to be afraid of the coming storm. Are things bad now? Yes. Yes. Are you afraid, really? Is there some part of you deep down that is afraid that actually it might get worse? Then I offer you hope. An uncommon hope. A peculiar hope. I offer you hope to find rest for your fear and your doom and your terror. To find rest, come to a sanctuary that is the shelter of the Most High. It is the hiding place under the kaporet, the covering of sin, the sacrifice of Yeshua. When you take refuge in that sanctuary place, you become the budded staff. You become the new life from the dead stick. You become the bread of life out of heaven. You become like manna for those who long for food in the wilderness. You become the revelation of Adonai, who writes his tablets of truth, his Torah, on your heart, that you might be a living Torah. All these things, when you take refuge in that sanctuary place. What is this sanctuary place that I'm speaking of? In the Mishkan, in the tabernacle of his presence, in the tent of meeting, is the inmost place, the most holy place. What is the most holy place? It is the place of the presence of Adonai. We have the ark, and on top of the ark we have the seat, made out of the cheruvim and made out of the kaporet, the covering. And this covering is the seat of mercy, that is the throne of his abiding presence. And it is under that kaporet, under that covering, under that kippur, that atonement, that we see the staff and the tablets and the manna. Do you see? When you take refuge in that sanctuary place, when you go take refuge in the shelter of the Most High, when you take refuge under his wings, do you see it? You are taking refuge in that sacred place. And then you become the budded staff, the new life that comes out of a dead stick. You become the bread of life out of heaven. You become like manna for those who long for food in the wilderness. And you become the revelation of Adonai, who writes his Torah on your heart, that you might also be a living Torah. This is the gospel that was written in the Torah of Moses. This is salvation in Yeshua. This is what we celebrate, and this is what we remember on Yom Kippur. Yeshua said this in Yochanan chapter 5, "If you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me." This is what he wrote about. He wrote about Yeshua and Yeshua's salvation. And we have this. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. I do not want you to be ignorant, brothers and sisters, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. They were all immersed into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Mashiach. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them, since they were struck down in the desert. And what do we have? At the end of that journey, we have the Song of Moses, where he's speaking of the rock in chapter 32 in our current Parsha. And who is this rock? This rock is blameless in all his ways, God of faithfulness without iniquity. Righteous and upright is he. He made the mountain of the heights of the land, chapter 32, verse 13. He suckled him with honey from a rock, speaking of how he nursed Judah, how he nursed people of Israel. But it says in verse 15, but you grew fat and wicked, you got fat and thick, you gorged, you had forsaken Adonai, and you had mocked the rock of salvation. Verse 18, the rock who birthed you, you ignored, and you forgot the God who brought you forth. Who is this rock? This rock is blameless in all his ways. In all his ways he is just. In all his ways he is faithfulness, without iniquity. Righteous and upright is he. This is what we have. This is our gospel salvation. As it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4, the rock was Messiah. The rock was Yeshua the Messiah. So come, please come. We have something we say at the end of the book, at the end of the Revelation. The Spirit and the bride say, come. Amen. Come, Yeshua. But before Yeshua comes, and I do believe he's coming soon, but before he comes, the world is polarizing. Things are becoming more distinct. Things are becoming more abrupt and black and white. Before we see Yeshua, then I say, come to you. If there's anyone listening to this and wants to know this Yeshua, this Mashiach, if any one of you is hearing from the Spirit, the Ruach now, knowing that you need this atonement, please reach out to me. Please contact me. I'd love to speak with you. I'd love to share this with you. Indeed, the days feel very, very close. We have had a completely unpredictable year. If nothing else, consider that things could get worse. I believe they will at some point, but just consider that things could get much, much worse. But in the meantime, for those of you who are in Yeshua, I pray blessings and comfort upon you. Yes, we are surrounded by the tumult. We are surrounded by the tumultuous waters. It feels like there is tohu vavohu, chaos and darkness over the waters. But be confident of this, that the one who has given birth to your faith, the one who has brought you forth out of darkness, he wouldn't do that only to leave you on the side of the road. Indeed, what mother would abandon their newborn child? No one. Neither will this God of heaven, this Father of creation, this Lord of all, abandon any of us in these dark and difficult days. With all the love of Yeshua, please stay close. Contact me if there's anything I can do for you. And may his wisdom and his salvation and his power guide you into all truth and protect you during these days. Shalom, shalom.